With today's first reading, I had to think to myself that parables, popcorn and parables this morning, might be pretty interesting. Watch out, grandparents. You might get asked some interesting questions after this morning's popcorn and parables. That great story of Abraham and Sarah, huh? There's a great story told among the Miccosukes, one of the Seminole tribe of Native Americans. And the Miccosukes, like many Native American tribes, have a centuries-old rite of passage that they observe. And that rite of passage is called the Vision Quest. And it's a rite of passage for boys as they turn 13 years old, as they enter their teenage years. And the story has it that years and years ago, a young Miccosukee boy set out on his vision quest. It was a journey that the young boy made alone. And he left the safety and security of the village and set out deep into the wilderness, equipped only with a bow, a quiver with a few arrows in it, and a little sack with some provisions. And so the story has it that this 13-year-old Miccosukee boy headed out from the safety of his village deep into the Everglades. And throughout the day, he managed to make it several miles away from his village. And as day began to give way to night at sunset, he decided it was a good time to find a place to settle down for the evening. And he happened upon a large cypress tree. And there he would stay for the night. And as the little bit of sun that was left at sunset gave way to the deeper darkness of night, fear overcame him. And there he stood, his back firmly up against the cypress tree, his eyes wide open into the deep darkness of the night in the Everglades. And after a while, he hears a great roar and the rustle of bushes. And he's confident that he's heard the black bear. And so he readies his bow and arrow, ready to strike. And after a while, the sound dissipates. He remains with his back firmly against the cypress, his eyes wide open. And after several more sleepless hours, he hears among the leaves the sithering and the rattle of a snake. And sure that rattlesnake is making its way towards him, he readies himself with bow and arrow. And eventually, the slithering sound and the rustling of the leaves give way to silence. Keeping his back firmly against that cypress tree, his eyes now full and bright. Several hours later, he hears a scampering through the mangroves, and he's sure that the panther is on the prowl. He once again readies himself with bow and arrow, and eventually the sound dissipates into silence. And after a long, frightful, and open-eyed evening, the dark of night finally begins to give way to the dawning of a new day. And as that light begins to appear, he notices a shadow cast from a bush nearby. And with the light of the new day, he summons the courage to pull himself away from the cypress tree and to check out who or what might be lying behind that bush. And as he turns the corner, his bow and arrow at the ready, to his surprise and to his great relief, he sees his father. And he recognizes and realizes his father had been with him the whole night. And he thinks to himself, if I had only known that my father was with me, I wouldn't have been so frightened. I could have slept peacefully, rested, and enjoyed my time in the wilderness. The disciples were sent. No, not on a vision quest, but they were sent as we all are sent. Commissioned by Jesus, who he himself is commissioned by God our Creator. And as God sends Jesus, so Jesus sends the apostles. And here is the incredible news. A constant for the Gospel of Matthew is that what is true for Jesus is true for the church. And so as God sends Jesus, so we are sent. Not just the 12 apostles, but you and me. By virtue of our baptism, we are sent to be healers and to be liberators. Proclaim the good news, Jesus commissions us. Cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. In the gospel today, Jesus says that to the 12. To the 12 who I imagine steeped in their Jewish faith, steeped in stories like Abraham and Sarah. He said those words to 12 who believed that all things were possible for God, even an elderly couple being able to give birth to a child. God can do in us what we could never imagine. The lesson of the vision quest for the Miccosukee is to know even when I think I am by myself, I'm never alone. For us, in that great commission, as God sends us out into the world to be healers, to liberate those held in captivity, to sin, to fear, to anxiety, to depression, to loneliness, to the God who sends us into a world that is hurting and broken. We don't go alone. We go with each other. God not only has our back, God is within us. God's grace is working through us to do what Jesus did, to bring healing and to bring freedom. We are sent. May we find ourselves in who God calls us to be.